Chapter 14, The Invitation. A week later, Ethan showed up at her apartment with an envelope in his hand. "My mother is hosting a Christmas charity gala," he said, handing it to her. "She invited you." Claire stared at the elegant cream invitation, gold lettering embossed across the front. "The Hale Foundation Annual Winter Gala. Black tie. Manhattan." "She invited me," Claire said, disbelieving. "After what she said to me at the office. She says she wants to make amends." Ethan sat down on the couch beside her, his jaw tight. "I think she wants to size you up. Properly. In front of all her friends." "Wonderful," Claire said dryly. "So it's a trap?" "Basically." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't have to go. I can tell her no. I don't care what she thinks." Claire thought about it. She thought about Victoria's cold eyes, her sharp words, the way she'd looked at Claire like she was something she'd stepped in. She thought about how much easier it would be to say no, to stay home in her sweatpants and eat pizza and pretend the Hales didn't exist. But then she thought about Ethan. About how tired he looked, how heavy the weight of his family was on his shoulders. About how he'd spent his whole life letting his mother push him around. "I'll go," she said. Ethan blinked. "Wait, really? Really?" Claire smiled, lacing her fingers through his. "If she wants to meet me properly, then I'll go. I'll put on a fancy dress and smile and be perfectly polite. And she'll see that I'm not going anywhere. Not that easily." Ethan stared at her. Then he laughed, a low, warm sound, and pulled her into his lap. "You're amazing, you know that," he said, pressing kisses to her cheek. "Most women would run screaming." "I'm not most women." "No," he said, smiling. "You're not." The next week was a whirlwind of dress shopping. Lena dragged her to every boutique in Brooklyn, insisting she needed something that would make the old bat's jaw drop. They finally found it, a deep emerald green silk dress, floor-length, with a low back and thin straps. It made Claire feel like a different person, confident, elegant, like she belonged in rooms with chandeliers and champagne. Ethan's eyes went wide when he saw her on the night of the gala. He was standing in her living room, adjusting his cufflinks, in a black tuxedo that fit him like a glove. When he turned and saw her, he froze. "Wow," he said, his voice rough. "Claire, you look good," she said, smiling, doing a little spin. "Stunning," he said, walking over to her. He took her hands, his eyes dark. "You take my breath away." Claire's cheeks heated up. Even after all this time, he still had a way of making her feel like the only girl in the world. "You don't look so bad yourself, Mr. Hale," she said, adjusting his bow tie. He kissed her, soft and slow, then pulled back with a grin. "Ready to go face the dragon?" "Ready," she said. "As long as you're by my side." "Always." Chapter 15, The Gala. The gala was held at a grand ballroom on Fifth Avenue. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, marble floors shone underfoot, and Christmas trees draped in gold and silver stood in every corner. Everyone was beautiful and expensive and perfectly put together, like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Claire felt like a fraud. She gripped Ethan's arm tight as they walked in, trying not to stare. "Breathe," Ethan whispered, leaning down to her ear. "You belong here. With me." Victoria found them 5 minutes later. She was wearing a silver gown, diamonds dripping from her neck and ears, her smile sharp as a knife. "Ethan, darling," she said, kissing him on both cheeks. Then she turned to Claire, her smile never faltering. "Claire. How lovely to see you again." "Mrs. Hale," Claire said, smiling politely. "Thank you for inviting me." "Of course. Any friend of Ethan's is welcome." Victoria's gaze swept over her dress, her hair, her shoes, quick and assessing. "That's a lovely dress." "Is it, vintage?" Claire knew it was a dig. She knew Victoria was pointing out that her dress wasn't designer, that it cost a fraction of what everyone else was wearing. But she just smiled. "Thank you. I found it at a little boutique in Brooklyn. It's one of my favorites." Victoria's smile tightened. Before she could reply, a group of people walked over, other socialites, other billionaires, all friends of the Hales. Ethan introduced Claire to all of them, his hand steady on her back. Most of them were polite, if a little curious. A few were openly dismissive, asking her where she'd gone to school, what her parents did, like they were checking off boxes on a list. Claire answered all their questions with a smile, her back straight, her head held high. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. Ethan was right beside her the whole time. Whenever someone asked a rude question, he'd step in, smoothly changing the subject, his hand warm and reassuring on her back. He never left her side. Not even for a second. Halfway through the night, Claire stepped outside to get some air. The balcony was quiet, the city lights sparkling below. She leaned against the railing, taking a deep breath of cold December air. "Having fun?" Ethan walked out beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He handed her one, then leaned against the railing beside her. "It's a lot," Claire said, laughing a little. "Everyone's so polished." "Fake, you mean?" "I was going to say fancy, but yet. Fake works too." Ethan laughed. He took a sip of champagne, then looked at her, his eyes soft in the balcony lights. "You were amazing in there," he said. "I know how hard this is for you. Dealing with all of them." "It's okay," Claire said, shrugging. "They're just people. Rich, bored people. They don't scare me." "No," he smiled. "Nothing scares you, does it?" "Lots of things scare me." She turned to look at him. "Losing you scares me." Ethan's smile faded. He set down his glass and reached for her, pulling her close. "You're not going to lose me," he said, his voice quiet and fierce. "Okay, no one and nothing is going to take you away from me. Not my mother. Not any of these people. Nothing." He kissed her then, slow and deep, out on the balcony under the stars, the sound of the party fading behind them. When they pulled apart, Claire rested her head on his chest. "I love you," she said, quiet enough that only he could hear. Ethan froze. For a second, she thought she'd messed up, that she'd said it too soon, that he wouldn't say it back. Then he tilted her chin up, and his eyes were shiny, like he was about to cry. "I love you too," he said. "More than anything." Inside, the party went on. But out on the balcony, everything felt new. Everything felt possible. Chapter 16, The Rumor. The week after the gala, everything felt like it was falling into place. Claire's gallery show had been a hit. She'd sold 3 paintings, and a small cafe chain wanted to commission her for a series of murals. Ethan's company was closing a huge deal, one he'd been working on for months. They were happy. They were in love. Then the rumor hit. It started on a business gossip site, then spread to the tabloids. Hail Capital CEO dating freelance illustrator office fling or serious? The article had a blurry photo of them kissing on her stoop, and a whole paragraph about Claire's small-town roots and modest background. The comments were brutal. Gold digger. Social climber. She's just after his money. He'll dump her in a month. Claire saw it first thing Monday morning, when Lena sent her the link with a string of angry emojis. Her stomach dropped as she read it, her hands shaking. Who would do this? She said, staring at her phone. Probably some gossip blogger, Lena said, pacing the kitchen. Or someone at Ethan's company who has it out for him. This is so messed up. Claire tried to brush it off. She told herself it didn't matter, that strangers on the internet didn't know her, that their opinions meant nothing. But it hurt. It hurt more than she wanted to admit. Ethan was furious when he found out. He called Liam first, barking orders about finding the source, about getting the article taken down. Then he called Claire, his voice tight with anger. "I'm so sorry," he said. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful." "It's not your fault," Claire said, sitting on her couch, staring at the wall. "People write stupid things all the time. This isn't okay. They're talking about you. Saying horrible things." "I know." Claire closed her eyes. "But it comes with the territory, right? Dating a guy like you. I knew what I was getting into." "You shouldn't have to deal with this," he said, his voice raw. "You didn't sign up for tabloids and gossip and people calling you names." Claire wanted to believe him. She wanted to say it was fine, that she could handle it. But the words kept playing in her head. Gold digger. Social climber. Just like Victoria had said. Maybe they were all right. Maybe she didn't belong in his world. That night, Ethan came over with takeout and flowers, determined to cheer her up. He sat on her couch and held her, and told her over and over that none of it was true, that he loved her, that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And Claire tried to believe him. She really did. But a seed of doubt had been planted. And it was starting to grow. Chapter 17, The Distance. After the article, things changed. Ethan got more protective. More careful. He stopped kissing her goodbye on the stoop, stopped holding her hand when they walked around the neighborhood. He said it was to keep her out of the spotlight, to keep the gossip from getting worse. But it felt like he was pulling away. He started working later and later. He'd cancel plans at the last minute, saying he had a meeting, that a deal was falling through, that he had to fly to DC for a day. Claire tried to be understanding. She knew his job was demanding, that he had a lot on his plate. But it was hard. It was hard to go from seeing him every day to seeing him once or twice a week. It was hard to fall asleep alone, wondering where he was, who he was with. Lena noticed. "He's pulling away," she said one night, when Claire was moping on the couch eating ice cream. "I'm telling you. Guys always do this when things get real." "He's not pulling away," Claire said, but she didn't sound convinced. "He's just busy. The big deal is closing this week." "Uh-huh. Sure." Lena sat down beside her. "Look, I like the guy. I do. But you deserve someone who makes time for you. Not someone who treats you like an afterthought." Claire wanted to argue. She wanted to say Ethan was different. But she couldn't. Not when she'd spent 3 nights in a row alone, waiting for him to call, waiting for him to come over. On Friday night, she'd made dinner. His favorite carbonara, from the Italian place near the office. She'd set the table, lit candles, put on his favorite jazz record. She was going to tell him she missed him, that they needed to talk, that this distance was killing her. At 8 o'clock, he texted. Stuck in a meeting. Can't make it? So sorry. Rain check. Claire stared at the text. The pasta was getting cold on the table. The candles flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. She didn't reply. She just turned off the lights, dumped the pasta in the trash, and went to bed. The next morning, he showed up at her door with coffee and bagels, looking tired and guilty. Claire, he said, when she opened the door. I am so sorry about last night. The meeting ran late, and then. It's fine, Claire said, turning and walking back into the apartment. You're busy. I get it. Hey. He followed her, his voice tight. Don't do that. Don't shut me out. Do what? Claire turned around, her voice sharp. Be fine with you canceling on me last minute for the 4th time this week. What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I'm okay with never seeing you, that I'm okay with being your secret girlfriend, that you only have time for when work isn't busy. That's not fair. Isn't it? Claire's eyes stung. We used to see each other every day. Now I'm lucky if I get a text before midnight. I feel like I'm dating a ghost. I'm closing the biggest deal of my career, Ethan said, his voice rising. I can't just drop everything because you're lonely. The words hung in the air. Claire flinched like he'd slapped her. Lonely, she said, quiet. That's what this is to you, me being lonely. Claire, I didn't mean that. No. You're right. She turned away, wiping at her eyes. You have your company. Your big deals. Your important life. And I'm just, the girl who paints walls. I shouldn't expect to be a priority. Ethan swore under his breath. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Claire, stop. That's not how I feel. You know that. Do I? She looked at him, her eyes wet. Because lately, it feels like your mom was right. I don't fit in your world. I'm just a distraction. Something you have fun with when you're not working. Silence fell. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes wide with hurt. You really think that? He said, his voice quiet. I don't know, Claire said, her voice breaking. I don't know what to think anymore. He stood there for a long time, staring at her. Then he ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I should go, he said. Give you space. Fine, Claire said, turning away so he wouldn't see her cry. The door closed behind him. Claire slid down to the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, and cried. She'd known it was too good to last. She'd known his world was too big, too bright, too fast for a girl from a small town in Ohio. And now it was all falling apart. Chapter 18, The Break. They didn't talk for 3 days. 3 days of radio silence. 3 days of Claire staring at her phone, waiting for a text that never came. 3 days of replaying the fight in her head, wondering if she'd been too harsh, wondering if she'd ruined everything. Lena was furious on her behalf. He's the one who bailed on you, she said, slamming her coffee mug down on the counter. He's the one who's been missing in action for weeks. Why are you the one moping? Because I love him, Claire said quietly, staring at her toast. And I hate fighting with him. Then call him, Lena said. Talk it out. Don't just sit here and wallow. But Claire couldn't. She was stubborn. And she was scared. Scared that if she called, he'd say it was over. Scared that he'd realized she was right, that she didn't fit. On the fourth day, Liam called her. "Claire," he said, his voice gentle. "Can we talk?" They met at a coffee shop in Brooklyn Heights. Liam was in jeans and a sweater, no suit, looking more tired than Claire had ever seen him. "How is he?" Claire asked, before he could even sit down. "Miserable," Liam said, sitting down across from her. "He's been working 18 hours a day, sleeping in his office, snapping at everyone. He's a mess." "Then why hasn't he called me?" Claire said, her voice wobbly. "If he's so miserable, why doesn't he just talk to me?" Liam sighed. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "You know how he is. He's terrible at this. Feelings. Vulnerability. He grew up thinking that if he let people get close, they'd leave. His dad left. His mom is his mom. The only way he knows how to protect himself is to push people away first." "He's not pushing me away," Claire said. "He's just busy." "Right." Liam hesitated. Then he said, "The deal he's working on, it's not just a big deal. It's make or break. If it falls through, the company could lose hundreds of millions. He's been under so much pressure, he can barely breathe. And he didn't want to dump all that on you. He thought if he pulled away a little, he could fix it before you had to see how bad it was." Claire's chest tightened. She'd had no idea. He'd never said anything. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Because he's an idiot," Liam said, bluntly. "Because he thinks he has to handle everything alone. Because he doesn't want you to see him as anything less than perfect." "But he's not perfect, Claire. He's a mess. And he loves you. More than I've ever seen him love anyone." He paused, then looked at her, his eyes earnest. "He's scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of failing. Scared that he's not good enough for you." Claire stared at him. She'd never thought of it that way. She'd been so busy feeling left out, feeling like she wasn't enough, that she'd never stopped to think he might feel the same way. "He's an idiot," she said, wiping at her eyes. "The biggest," Liam agreed. "But he's our idiot. And he needs you." Chapter 19, The Reconciliation. Claire went to his office that afternoon. She took the subway to Midtown, walked into the Hale Capitol building, and Chapter 19, The Midtown Office. She took the subway to Midtown, walked into the Hale Capitol building, and asked for Ethan at the front desk. The receptionist looked surprised. No one just showed up asking for Ethan Hale unannounced, but one look at Claire's face, and she picked up the phone. 5 minutes later, Liam came rushing out. "He's in his office," he said, voice low. "He hasn't left in 3 days. Be gentle, okay? He's not in a good place." Claire nodded. She walked down the long glass hallway, past rows of quiet desks, until she reached the corner office at the end. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open softly. Ethan was sitting at his desk, head in his hands. His suit jacket was thrown over a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair messy from running his hands through it. Empty coffee cups littered the desk. The room was dark, the only light coming from the computer screens in front of him. He looked up when she walked in. His eyes were red-rimmed, tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "Claire," he stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you," she said, stopping a few feet from his desk. Liam told me about the deal. About how bad it is. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked away, like he was ashamed. I didn't want you to see me like this, he said quietly. I didn't want you to see me failing. Failing. Claire stepped closer. Ethan, you're not failing. You're human. You don't have to be perfect all the time. Not for me. He looked at her then, his gray eyes shiny. I pushed you away, he said, his voice breaking a little. I was scared. Scared that if you saw how messed up everything is, you'd leave. Just like everyone else. I'm not going anywhere, she said, stepping right up to him. She reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing his cheek. I'm here. For the good days and the bad days. All of it. He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing her in. Then he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her tight, burying his face in her hair. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I was an idiot. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't a priority. You are my priority. You're everything. Claire held him back, her hands rubbing his back. She could feel the tension in his shoulders, the weight he'd been carrying alone. We're a team, remember, she said. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were soft, vulnerable, nothing like the cold Wall Street tycoon everyone else saw. I love you, he said, like he was saying it for the first time all over again. I love you too, she said. He kissed her then, slow and desperate, like he was scared she'd disappear if he let go. The office was quiet around them, the city humming outside the windows, and for a little while, nothing else mattered. Chapter 20, The Deal That Changed Everything. 3 days later, the deal closed. It was 2 a.m. when Ethan called. Claire was asleep in her bed, but she fumbled for her phone the second she saw his name on the screen. We did it, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice, the relief. It's done. We closed. Claire sat up in bed, wide awake. You did it really? Really? We pulled it off at the last minute. Liam's already passed out on the couch in the break room. He laughed, a tired, happy sound. I'm on my way over. I want to see you. 20 minutes later, she opened her front door to find him standing there, still in his suit, tie loose, holding a bottle of champagne and a paper bag full of donuts from her favorite shop. Celebratory breakfast, he said, holding up the bag. At 2:30 in the morning. She laughed and pulled him inside. They sat on her kitchen floor, drinking champagne out of mugs because she didn't have any flutes, eating glazed donuts, and laughing like idiots. It was messy and silly and perfect. I'm so proud of you, Claire said, reaching across the floor to touch his hand. You worked so hard for this. I couldn't have done it without you, he said, squeezing her hand. You kept me sane. When I thought I was going to lose my mind, I just thought of you. And it got me through. Claire's chest felt warm, tight with love. She leaned across the floor and kissed him, sweet and slow, champagne on his lips, sugar on her tongue. That night, he stayed. For the first time in weeks, he slept through the night, his arms wrapped around her, his head on her shoulder. No late-night calls, no spreadsheets, no pressure. Just them. But across town, in her penthouse on Park Avenue, Victoria Hale was not celebrating. She'd heard the news. She'd known Ethan would pull through, he always did. But she'd also seen the way he'd changed. The way he'd softened. The way he'd started choosing that girl over everything else. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "Set up a meeting," she said, her voice cold. "With Claire Bennett. Tomorrow. At my townhouse." The game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Chapter 21, The Offer. The invitation came the next morning, hand-delivered to Claire's apartment. A cream card with Victoria's elegant script, asking her to tea at the Hale townhouse on the Upper East Side at 3 p.m. Claire stared at it for 10 minutes. She considered saying no. She considered calling Ethan and asking him to handle it. But she knew she couldn't hide forever. If she and Ethan were going to make this work, she had to face Victoria head-on. She texted Lena. "Victoria invited me to tea. At her house. Today." Lena wrote back immediately. "No. Don't go. She's going to eat you alive. Bring Ethan with you." "I have to do this alone," Claire replied. "If I'm going to be with him, I have to stand up to her myself." "You're insane." "But I respect it. Call me the second you leave. If you don't call in 2 hours, I'm sending the cops." Claire laughed. She put on a simple navy dress, low heels, her hair pulled back neat and professional. She wanted to look like she belonged. Not because she cared what Victoria thought, but because she wanted the woman to see that she wasn't some silly girl who'd stumbled into a rich man's bed. She was serious. She was here to stay. The Hale townhouse was massive, a 5-story brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street. The door was opened by a housekeeper in a crisp uniform, who led Claire through a marble foyer and into a formal sitting room. Victoria was sitting by the fireplace, a tea set on the table in front of her. She looked up when Claire walked in, her expression unreadable. "Claire," she said, nodding once. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," Claire said, sitting down across from her. She kept her back straight, her head held high. Victoria poured her a cup of tea. They made small talk for 5 minutes about the weather, about the murals, about the gallery show. All polite, all surface level. Claire could feel the tension hanging in the air, thick as smoke. Finally, Victoria set down her teacup. "I'm sure you're wondering why I asked you here," she said. "I have a few ideas," Claire said calmly. Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table toward Claire. "Inside is a check," she said. "For $500,000. Enough to open your own studio. Enough to buy a house. Enough to never have to worry about money again." Claire stared at the envelope. She didn't touch it. "And what do you want in return?" "I want you to leave Ethan," Victoria said, flat and direct. "I want you to take the money, go back to Ohio or wherever you want, and never see him again." Claire's blood ran cold. She'd expected cruelty. She'd expected insults. But she hadn't expected this. "You think you can buy me off," she said, her voice steady. "You think I care about money." "Everyone cares about money," Victoria said. "Especially girls like you. Girls who grew up with nothing. You think you love him now, but wait until you're stuck in his world. Wait until the paparazzi follow you everywhere. Wait until you're mocked at every party for not knowing which fork to use. It won't be fun forever. And he will get tired of you. He always does." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Take the money, Claire. It's the best deal you'll ever get." Walk away with your pride intact. Because if you don't, I will make your life miserable. I will ruin every client you have. I will make sure no gallery in the city will show your work. You will lose everything. And in the end, you'll still lose him. Claire sat there for a long, quiet moment. Then she stood up. She left the envelope sitting on the table, untouched. You don't know me at all, Mrs. Hale, she said. And you don't know your son. I'm not leaving him. Not for money. Not because you threaten me. Not for anything. She turned to walk away. You'll regret this, Victoria called after her. Claire stopped in the doorway. She didn't turn around. No, she said. I won't. She walked out of the townhouse, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. But she held her head high. She'd done it. She'd stood up to Victoria Hale. And she'd won. Chapter 22, The Confrontation. Claire didn't tell Ethan about the meeting at first. She didn't want to add more stress to his plate, not right after the big deal closed. She tried to pretend nothing had happened, to go back to normal. But Ethan noticed. He noticed the way she tensed up when his mother's name came up. He noticed the way she'd zone out at dinner, like she was thinking about something heavy. On the third night, he called her on it. Okay, what's going on, he said, setting down his fork. You've been weird for 3 days. Did something happen? Nothing happened, Claire said, pushing her food around her plate. Claire. His voice was soft but firm. Look at me. Tell me the truth, she sighed. She set down her fork and looked up at him. Your mother invited me to tea on Tuesday, she said. At her townhouse. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did she do? She offered me money. $500,000. To leave you. The room went dead silent. Ethan's face went pale, then red with anger. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. She did what? Ethan, it's okay. It's not okay. He was pacing now, his hands clenched into fists. She had no right. No right to come at you like that. To try and buy you off like you're some kind of thing. He grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair. Where are you going? Claire said, standing up. To talk to her. Ethan, wait. No. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. This ends now. I'm not letting her treat you like this. I'm not letting her control my life anymore. He kissed her quickly, hard, then walked out the door. Claire sat back down at the table, her hands shaking. She hoped he wouldn't do something he'd regret. She hoped this wouldn't make things worse. Across town, Ethan stormed into his mother's townhouse an hour later. He didn't wait for the housekeeper to announce him. He marched straight into the sitting room, where Victoria was reading by the fire. You went to Claire, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You offered her money. Victoria looked up from her book. She didn't even look surprised. Someone had to be realistic, she said calmly. She's not right for you, Ethan. She's from a different world. That's not your decision to make. He slammed his hand down on the mantel. I am 29 years old. I run my own company. I make my own choices. And I choose her. You're being naive, Victoria said, standing up. You think this is love, this is infatuation. A distraction. You have a legacy to uphold. A family name. I don't care about the legacy. He shouted. I don't care about the name. I care about being happy. And she makes me happy. Happier than I've ever been in my entire life. He took a step toward her, his eyes hard. If you ever go near her again. If you ever threaten her. If you ever so much as say her name with that tone in your voice. We're done. You and me. Done. Do you understand? Victoria stared at him. For a split second, Claire would have seen something like hurt flash across her face. But it was gone just as fast. You'd choose her over your own mother, she said, her voice cold. You're making me choose, he said. Don't make me pick sides. Because you will lose. He turned and walked out. The front door slammed behind him, echoing through the empty townhouse. Victoria stood there by the fireplace, alone. Her hands were clenched at her sides. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she picked up the phone. Call Richard, she said to her assistant. Tell him I want to move forward with the Hale Capital Stake plan. We're going to teach my son a lesson. Chapter 23, The Trip Home. After the fight with his mother, Ethan was on edge for days. He was angry, frustrated, hurt. Claire could see it in the way he tensed up every time his phone rang, in the way he'd stare out the window for hours, quiet and distant. One night, as they were lying in bed, Claire had an idea. Come home with me, she said, tracing patterns on his chest. Home. To Ohio. To my parents' house. For Thanksgiving. It's next week. Ethan paused. He'd never met her parents. He'd never even been to Ohio. The thought made him nervous. What if they didn't like him? What if he was too much of a city slicker for their small town life? Are you sure? He said. You don't think it's too soon? Never too soon to meet the family, she said, smiling up at him. And you need a break. From the city. From work. From her. Come on. It'll be quiet. Boring, even. Good for you. He thought about it. Then he smiled. Okay, he said. Let's go. They drove out the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It was a 6-hour drive, but it went fast. They talked, sang along to bad radio, stopped at roadside diners for bad coffee and pie. By the time they pulled into Claire's hometown, a tiny little town with one stoplight and a main street full of brick storefronts, Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. Claire's parents lived in a small yellow house with a white picket fence and a big porch. Her mom was a warm, round woman with curly hair just like Claire's. Her dad was quiet, with calloused hands from working at the local factory, and a soft smile. They welcomed Ethan like he was family. Her mom fussed over him, piling food on his plate, asking him a million questions. Her dad took him out to the garage to look at his old truck, and they talked about cars and football and all the things dads talk about. It was strange, at first. Ethan wasn't used to loud family dinners, to people asking how his day was just because they cared, to laughter around a table every night. But it was nice. So nice it made his chest ache. On Thanksgiving night, after dinner, they sat on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. The town was quiet, no car horns, no sirens, just crickets and the distant sound of a dog barking. This is nice, Ethan said, his arm wrapped around her. I can see why you love it here. It's quiet, Claire said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Sometimes too quiet. But it's home. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, I never had this. Family dinners. Porch swings. My dad left when I was 12. My mom was always too busy with parties and charity events. Most nights, I ate dinner alone in my room with a housekeeper. Claire turned to look at him. The porch light cast soft shadows on his face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It's okay," he said, shrugging. "I got used to it. But, being here with your family, it makes me want that. For us. Someday. A house. A family. Quiet nights. All of it." Claire's heart felt full, warm, and soft. "Me too," she said. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, under the stars on her parents' porch. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he'd found somewhere he belonged. Not in a penthouse on Park Avenue. Not in a corner office on Fifth. Right here. With her. Chapter 24, The Return. They drove back to New York on Sunday night. Ethan felt rested, calm, like he could take on anything. The fight with his mother felt far away, like a bad dream. But the second they walked into Claire's apartment, Claire's phone started blowing up. Texts from Lena. Calls from Liam. Emails from clients. Something was wrong. Claire opened her laptop. The first thing she saw was a headline on a business news site: Hale Capital under fire, major investor pulls $200 stake amid leadership concerns. Her stomach dropped. She looked up at Ethan, who was already reading the article over her shoulder. His face had gone pale. "What is this?" Claire said. "Richard Cole," Ethan said, his voice tight. "He's one of our oldest investors. A friend of my mother's." He picked up his phone and called Liam. "I just saw the news," he said, the second Liam picked up. "What happened?" "He pulled out this morning," Liam said, his voice stressed. "Said he's lost confidence in your leadership. That you're distracted. Everyone's talking. 2 more investors are on the fence. If they pull out too." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Claire stood there, watching Ethan's face harden, watching the calm, happy man from Ohio disappear, replaced by the cold, sharp businessman. "I'll be in the office first thing tomorrow," Ethan said, hanging up the phone. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I knew she wouldn't back down. I knew she'd do something." "Your mom," Claire said. "She did this." "Who else?" he laughed, bitter. "She's using her friends to squeeze the company. She thinks if she puts enough pressure on me, I'll cave. I'll break up with you and do what she wants." Claire's chest tightened. She'd known Victoria was cruel. But she hadn't thought she'd go this far, risking the company Ethan had built from nothing, just to get her way. "What are you going to do?" she said. Ethan looked at her. His jaw was set, his eyes determined. "I'm going to fight," he said. "I'm not giving her what she wants. Not this time." But Claire could see the worry in his eyes. She knew this was bad. Worse than the last deal. This wasn't just one deal falling through. This was his whole company. His whole life's work. And it was all because of her. Chapter 25, The First Crack. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Ethan worked 18-hour days. He met with investors, negotiated with lawyers, tried to stop the bleeding. But it was like trying to hold water in his hands. Every time he plugged one hole, another one opened up. More investors pulled out. Clients started questioning their contracts. The business press circled like vultures, writing article after article about Hale Capital's impending collapse. Claire tried to be supportive. She brought him lunch at the office. She stayed up with him when he came home late. She listened when he ranted about his mother, about the investors, about how unfair it all was. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it was all her fault. That if she'd just walked away, if she'd never met him, none of this would be happening. One night, he came home at 1 a.m. He looked exhausted, defeated. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat on the couch, staring at the wall. "Is it that bad?" Claire said, sitting down beside him. "It's bad," he said, his voice flat. "If we don't find a new investor by the end of the month, we're going to have to downsize. Lay off half the staff. Maybe more." He took a long drink of whiskey. "She's winning," he said, quiet. "My mother? She's actually winning." Claire's heart ached for him. She reached out and took his hand. "We'll find a way," she said. "We always do." "Will we?" He looked at her, his eyes tired. "What if we don't? What if I lose everything?" "Then we lose everything together," she said. "We'll move to Ohio. We'll get a little house with a porch. You can teach business at the community college. I'll paint. We'll be fine." Ethan laughed, a small, sad sound. He squeezed her hand. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Every word." He pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "You deserve everything," she whispered back. But lying there in the dark, Claire's mind was racing. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit around and watch him lose everything he'd worked for. She had to help. And then she had an idea. Chapter 26, The Side Project. The next morning, Claire went to Ethan's office early. She found him in the conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets, drinking his third coffee of the day. "I have an idea," she said, setting down her sketchbook on the table. Ethan looked up, tired but curious. "What kind of idea?" "Your company does community outreach, right? The after-school programs for kids in Brooklyn, the small business grants." "Yeah," he said, frowning. "We've had that program for 2 years." "Why?" "No one knows about it," Claire said, leaning forward. "All anyone reads about is the drama, the investors pulling out, all the negative stuff. But no one knows about the good you do. The kids you help. The small businesses you fund." She opened her sketchbook, showing him a series of rough drawings. "I want to turn those stories into art. Murals at the community centers. Social media illustrations. A whole campaign. Show people that Hale Capital isn't just some rich guy's company. It's a company that cares about Brooklyn. About real people." Ethan stared at the sketches. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. "Claire, think about it," she said, excited now. "Right now, all the investors see is risk. But if we can shift the narrative, if we can show that this company has heart, that it's rooted in the community, new investors will come. People want to invest in something that matters." He looked up at her. There was something like hope in his eyes, for the first time in weeks. "You think this could work?" "I know it could," she said. "Let me do this." "For you?" "For the company." Ethan sat there for a long moment, looking at her, at the sketches, at the determined look on her face. Then he smiled. A real smile. "Do it," he said. "Whatever you need. Whatever budget you need. It's yours." Claire got to work that same day. She visited the after-school programs, talked to the kids, interviewed the small business owners who'd received grants. She drew every day, late into the night. She designed murals, social media graphics, short comic strips telling real people's stories. Lena helped her run the social media accounts. They posted one story a day, paired with Claire's art. At first, no one paid attention. But then a local Brooklyn blog picked it up. Then a citywide account. Then a national business magazine wrote an article about it, Hail Capital's secret weapon, art that gives back. Slowly, the tide started to turn. People started talking about the good work, not the drama. Comments on the news articles shifted from bashing Ethan to praising the company's community work. Small business owners started reaching out, wanting to partner. Local politicians tweeted their support. And then, one morning, Ethan got an email from a new investor. A big one. A family foundation that focused on community-focused businesses. They wanted to meet. Chapter 27, The Backlash. Victoria was furious when she saw the campaign. She'd been so sure she was winning. So sure Ethan would cave any day now. And then that girl had to go and ruin everything with her silly little drawings. She called her contact at the tabloids. She fed them a new story. A nastier one. It hit the news 2 days later. Illustrator girlfriend uses Hail Capital connections for self-promotion. Is the community campaign just a PR stunt? The article said Claire was using the company to boost her own career, that she was profiting off the community program, that the whole thing was a fake publicity stunt designed to save Ethan's reputation. The comments turned ugly again. Gold digger. Opportunist. Using kids for clout. Claire saw it first thing in the morning. She was sitting at her kitchen table, drinking coffee, scrolling through the campaign's Instagram account. And there it was, hundreds of mean comments, people calling her names, accusing her of all kinds of terrible things. Her hands started shaking. She set down her phone. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't breathe. Ethan came out of the bedroom, already on a work call. He saw her face and stopped mid-sentence. "I'll call you back," he said, hanging up immediately. He walked over to her, kneeling down in front of her chair. "Hey. What's wrong? What happened?" Claire just pushed her phone across the table toward him. He picked it up. He read the article. His face got darker and darker with every line. By the time he finished, his jaw was clenched so tight Claire was surprised his teeth didn't crack. "This is bullshit," he said, slamming the phone down. "Complete bullshit. You've worked your ass off on this. You haven't taken a dime for it." "I know," Claire said, her voice wobbly. "But people believe it. They think I'm just using you. Using those kids." Tears stung her eyes. She'd tried so hard. She'd poured her heart into that campaign. And now they were tearing it all down. "Maybe your mom is right," she said, quiet. "Maybe I'm just making things worse for you." Ethan's face softened. He reached up and wiped a tear off her cheek with his thumb. "Hey. Don't say that. Don't ever say that. You're the best thing that ever happened to this company. To me. None of this would be happening without you." He stood up, pulling her up with him. He wrapped his arms around her tight. "This is her game," he said, his voice low. "She wants to break you. She wants you to quit. To run away. And we are not going to let her win. Okay." Claire nodded into his chest. She took a deep breath, breathing in his scent, letting his steady heartbeat calm her down. "Okay," she said. "Good." He pulled back, looking her in the eye. "Because we're not backing down. We're going to keep going. We're going to show them all that this is real. That we are real." Chapter 28, The Stand. Claire didn't back down. Instead of hiding, she posted a video on Instagram. She sat in front of her camera, no makeup, hair messy, just her and her sketchbook. She talked about the kids she'd met. The single mom who'd gotten a grant to open her own bakery. The after-school art program that gave kids somewhere to go after school. She talked about growing up poor in Ohio, about how art had saved her when she was a kid. About how much this program meant to her, because she'd been one of those kids once. "I didn't get paid for this," she said, looking straight into the camera. "I did it because it matters. Because kids deserve to have art in their lives. Because small businesses deserve a chance. And if that makes me an opportunist, then fine. I'm guilty of wanting to help people." The video went viral. Not just New York viral. National viral. People shared it everywhere. Single moms, artists, small business owners, people who'd grown up with nothing. They shared their own stories. They defended Claire. They praised the program. Hail Capital Gives Back started trending. People started posting photos of the murals, of the community centers, of the kids in the after-school programs. The tide turned completely. The tabloid that had run the hit piece had to issue a retraction. The negative comments got drowned out by thousands of positive ones. Local news did segments on the program. More investors reached out. By the end of the week, the foundation had sent over a term sheet. They wanted to invest $250 million. More than enough to cover the investors who'd pulled out. More than enough to save the company. Ethan called Claire from the office, his voice shaking with excitement. "We did it," he said. "They signed. The deal is done. We're saved." Claire screamed. She jumped up and down in her living room, laughing and crying at the same time. "I knew it," she said. "I knew we could do it." "You did it," he said. "This was all you. You saved us, Claire. You saved the company." That night, they went out to dinner at their little Italian place in Brooklyn. They ate carbonara and drank wine and laughed until their sides hurt. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off their shoulders. "We did it," Ethan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We beat her." "We sure did," Claire said, smiling. But across town, Victoria was sitting in her dark sitting room, staring at her phone. She'd lost. She'd thrown everything she had at them, and they'd still won. For the first time, she wondered if she'd been wrong. Chapter 1, Rain on the Brooklyn Bridge. October in New York always brought unannounced rain at dusk. Claire clutched her freshly printed illustration portfolio and huddled under the overhang of the Brooklyn Bridge pedestrian walkway, trying to shield herself from the wind-driven rain. Dampness seeped into her canvas bag, and the cuffs of her cream knit sweater had darkened to a soggy beige. She'd just left a design studio in Manhattan. She was supposed to take the subway back to Brooklyn, but something had pulled her onto the bridge instead. 3 months in the city, and she'd never stopped to really look at the famous landmark. "Excuse me." A low, gravelly male voice came from beside her, rough-edged as if caught in the rain. Claire turned and found herself staring into a pair of deep gray eyes. The man wore a perfectly tailored charcoal overcoat, sleeves rolled slightly to reveal a sleek black watch on his wrist. He held a large black umbrella, and he'd angled most of it over her, leaving his own left shoulder soaked through. You. Claire blinked, stepping aside instinctively. You don't have to do that. I'm fine. The rain is heavy. His gaze flicked to the document bag she pressed tight to her chest. Your portfolio will get ruined. There was no warmth in his tone, but he'd hit exactly where it mattered. Those drawings were the product of 3 straight all-nighters, revised again and again for her first big client pitch. She couldn't afford to let them smudge. Thank you, she said softly, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. I'm Claire. Claire Bennett. Ethan Hale. He nodded once, brief and formal. They stood in silence for a minute, rain drumming against the umbrella fabric. Below them, the East River churned gray under the overcast sky, Manhattan's skyline glowing faintly through the mist. It was the kind of quiet that would have felt awkward with a stranger, but somehow it didn't. Are you heading to Brooklyn? Ethan asked eventually. Claire nodded. Williamsburg, yeah. I'm going that way too. I'll walk you to the end of the bridge. He didn't wait for her to agree, just adjusted his grip on the umbrella and started walking slowly, matching her pace. She fell into step beside him, shoulder almost brushing his coat. The umbrella was large, but the wind kept twisting the rain sideways. Every so often, he'd tilt the canopy a little more toward her, and the damp patch on his shoulder would grow. You'll catch a cold, Claire said, reaching up to push the umbrella back toward him. I'm already half wet anyway. It's fine. His voice was steady, unyielding. I have a car waiting at the other end. I'll be fine. They reached the Brooklyn side 10 minutes later. The rain was starting to let up, thinning into a fine drizzle. A black sedan idled by the curb, a driver standing at attention by the back door. Ethan stopped under the awning of a corner bodega and closed the umbrella. This is where I leave you. Claire looked up at him. Street light caught the side of his face, sharp jawline, long dark lashes, that unreadable gray gaze. For a second, she forgot how to speak. Thank you again, she said finally, clutching her portfolio tighter. Really? You saved my pitch. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker crossed his face, something like amusement, gone before she could be sure. Good luck with your pitch, Claire Bennett. He turned and walked to the car. The driver opened the door, and he slid inside without looking back. The sedan pulled away into the evening traffic, disappearing around the corner before Claire could even think to ask for his number. She stood there for a long minute, drizzle kissing her cheeks. Hale, the name sounded familiar, like something she'd schemed past in the business section of a newspaper. But she couldn't place it. Shaking her head, she turned for the subway. Just a random encounter with a stranger, she told herself. Nothing more. But when she got home and pulled out her sketchbook that night, she found herself drawing the curve of a man's shoulder, dark coat damp with rain, and a pair of gray eyes she couldn't seem to forget. Chapter 2, The Room Full of Suits. The pitch was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Hale Capital's Midtown office. Claire had ironed her only blazer, pinned her hair back neatly, and practiced her presentation 3 times on the subway. She'd been hired by a boutique home goods brand to design their spring collection packaging, and she'd had no idea their biggest investor was the very firm whose name she'd been replaying in her head for 2 days. Hale Capital. Ethan Hale. It clicked the second she stepped off the elevator and saw the logo on the wall. Her stomach did a little flip. No wonder the name had sounded familiar. He was everywhere in the business press, the 29-year-old wunderkind who'd built a billion-dollar firm in 3 years. The conference room was all glass and steel, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Park Avenue. 4 people sat at the long table, 2 brand managers, a marketing director, and him. Ethan Hale sat at the head of the table, dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. He looked up when she walked in, and his expression didn't shift at all, no flicker of recognition, no hint that they'd shared an umbrella in the rain 2 nights before. Claire's chest tightened a little. Of course he wouldn't remember. She was just some random girl on a bridge. He probably met 100 people a day. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," the marketing director said, standing to shake her hand. "Thanks for coming in. Let's get started." She set up her tablet and began walking them through her designs: soft watercolor florals, hand-drawn typography, warm, earthy tones inspired by the Brooklyn brownstones she walked past every day. She talked about texture, about storytelling, about making everyday objects feel like small pieces of art. The room was quiet when she finished. The brand managers nodded, murmuring approval. Then all eyes turned to Ethan. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, and studied the screen for a long, silent beat. "The concept is charming," he said finally, his voice cool and even. "But it's soft. It doesn't stand out. This brand is scaling into national retail. It needs to grab attention on a shelf, not just look pretty on an Instagram feed." Claire's cheeks warmed. She'd heard that critique before. People called her work too gentle, too small town. But she'd never heard it delivered so sharply, so matter-of-factly, from someone who'd once held an umbrella over her in the rain. "With all respect, Mr. Hale," she said, lifting her chin, "the point of the design is to feel quiet and familiar. People don't buy candles and mugs because they're loud. They buy them because they feel like home." His gray eyes locked onto hers. For a split second, something shifted in them, like he was finally seeing her, not just the pitch. "Home is subjective," he said. "Not the feeling of it." She held his gaze. "Everyone recognizes the feeling of coming home to something warm." The room went still. The marketing director glanced nervously between them. Then Ethan's mouth tugged upward, just the tiniest amount. "Fair point." He turned to the brand team. "Run 2 rounds of consumer testing, this version, and a bolder alternative. We'll compare the data." The meeting wrapped up 10 minutes later. The others filed out, but Claire lingered, packing up her things slowly. When the room was empty except for the 2 of them, she looked up. "You didn't remember me," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "I remembered you. You could have said something. This is a professional meeting." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Your work is better than most of what comes through this office. For what it's worth." He left before she could reply. Claire stood there alone, heart beating a little faster. She couldn't tell if he was being rude, or awkward, or something else entirely. All she knew was that the stranger from the bridge was suddenly a lot harder to forget. Chapter 3, An Unexpected Commission. A week later, Claire got an email from Liam Carter, Chief of Staff at Hale Capital. "Mr. Hale is renovating his new penthouse office in Brooklyn Heights," the message read. "He is looking for an illustrator to create a series of large-scale wall murals for the common areas. He requested your portfolio specifically. Would you be available for a consultation this week?" Claire stared at the screen for 5 full minutes. She read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't misreading it. Ethan Hale had asked for her after tearing apart her pitch in front of the whole room. Lena screamed when Claire told her that night over takeout. Are you kidding? This is the meet cute payoff, she said around a mouthful of dumplings. Mysterious Wall Street guy shares your umbrella, sees your work, hires you for his fancy office. It's like a rom-com. It's a job, Lena, Claire said, but she couldn't stop smiling. Just a job. He's probably just hiring me because he thinks I'm cheap. Please. The man is a billionaire. He doesn't hire people because they're cheap. He hires people because he wants to look at their art. Or at them. Lena waggled her eyebrows. Don't pretend you didn't think he was hot. Claire threw a napkin at her. Shut up. The consultation was at the Brooklyn Heights penthouse office 3 days later. The space was raw, half-renovated, floor-to-ceiling windows looking straight out at the Statue of Liberty and the New York Harbor skyline. Ethan was there in a black turtleneck and dark jeans, less formal than she'd seen him before, talking to a contractor. He turned when she walked in. Ms. Bennett. Thanks for coming. Claire is fine. She walked over to the windows, breath catching at the view. This space is incredible. It's empty right now. He walked over to stand beside her. I want it to feel less like an office and more like somewhere people want to be. You talked about home in the pitch. That's what I want here. Claire blinked. She hadn't expected him to remember that. Wall murals in 3 areas, he continued, walking her through the space. The entrance lounge, the kitchen break area, and the rooftop terrace wall. I don't have a fixed brief. I want your take on New York, your version of it, not the postcard version. Your version, she repeated. You want my perspective. I hired you for your eye, not to execute someone else's vision. He glanced at her. You draw Brooklyn a lot. I saw it in your portfolio. She'd filled half her portfolio with sketches of her neighborhood, brownstone stoops, bodega cats, sunset over the rooftops, old men playing chess in the park. It was her favorite thing to draw, the quiet, unglamorous beauty of the borough she'd fallen in love with. I can do that, she said, already mentally sketching. I can do 3 different moods. Entrance lounge as morning, quiet, and golden. Break room as midday, lively, and warm. Rooftop as sunset, Brooklyn sunset, over the water. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the harbor. Brooklyn sunset, he repeated, almost to himself. I like that. They spent the next hour going over dimensions, timelines, budget. When they were done, he walked her to the elevator. I'll have Liam send over the contract this evening, he said. If you have questions, you can email me directly. The elevator doors slid open. Claire stepped inside, then turned to look at him. Mr. Hale. Ethan. Ethan. She smiled a little. Why me? There are a dozen more famous illustrators in the city. You could have hired anyone. He held her gaze for a long second. Because you see the parts of the city everyone else walks past, he said. I'm tired of looking at the parts everyone already knows. The doors slid closed before she could reply. Claire leaned back against the elevator wall, heart fluttering. For a man who said so little, he had a way of saying exactly the thing that stuck with you. That night, she opened her sketchbook and started drawing the first mural. In the corner, small and barely noticeable, she drew a black umbrella, and 2 people standing side by side in the rain. Due to the length of a 40-chapter serial, the above presents the complete first 3 chapters of Brooklyn Sunset. The full 40-chapter arc will follow their journey, slow burn workplace tension, gradual vulnerability as Ethan opens up about his past, clashes with his mother Victoria, a summer of rooftop sunsets and late-night work sessions, misunderstandings and reconciliations, and finally a heartfelt resolution set against a Brooklyn sunset. I can continue releasing chapters one by one. Would you like me to proceed with chapter 4 next? 40. Brooklyn Sunset. Chapter 4, Late Nights and Takeout Coffee. The mural project consumed Claire's days. She showed up at the Brooklyn Heights penthouse at 8 every morning, paint-splattered jeans and a faded flannel tied around her waist, and lost herself in the blank white walls. Ethan was rarely there during work hours, off in Midtown meetings, closing deals, moving numbers around that Claire could barely fathom, but he always came back in the evenings, long after the contractors had left. He never hovered. He'd pour himself a glass of whiskey, sit on the floor by the windows, and watch her work in silence. Sometimes he'd take calls, voice low and sharp, talking about markets and acquisitions. Sometimes he'd just sit there, staring out at the harbor, his face softening in the golden evening light. One Tuesday in late October, Claire was still there at 9 o'clock, touching up the skyline on the entrance lounge wall. She'd lost track of time, too focused on getting the exact shade of amber for the morning light. "You're still here." Ethan's voice made her jump. She turned, paintbrush in hand, and found him leaning in the doorway, suit jacket slung over his arm, tie loosened. He looked tired, lines under his eyes, shoulders tight. "I got carried away," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. The light was perfect for this section. "I didn't want to stop." He walked over, stopping a few feet from the wall. His eyes traced the curve of the brownstone stoops she'd painted, the old man with a newspaper on the steps, a tabby cat curled on a railing. "It looks like memory," he said quietly. "Like something you'd look back on and smile." Claire's chest felt warm. No one had ever put it that way before. "I grew up in a town full of porches like that," she said. Everyone knew everyone. You'd sit on the steps at the end of the day and watch the world go by. "Ohio, right?" She blinked. "You remembered." "I read your portfolio bio." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "I grew up on Park Avenue. No porches. No neighbors stopping by. Just walls. And silence." There was a flatness to his voice, like he was stating a fact, not complaining. But Claire heard it anyway, the quiet loneliness underneath. "Sounds lonely," she said softly. He shrugged. "You get used to it." A beat of silence passed between them. The city hummed below the windows, distant car horns and siren wails fading into the night. "Have you eaten?" Ethan asked suddenly. Claire's stomach growled on cue. She laughed, embarrassed. "I forgot, honestly." "I'll order something. There's a great Italian place around the corner. They do the best carbonara in Brooklyn." He didn't ask if she wanted Italian. He just pulled out his phone and placed the order, like it was the most natural thing in the world. 20 minutes later, they were sitting on the floor of the empty lounge, paper boxes between them, eating pasta straight out of the containers. It was absurd, Claire thought. A billionaire Wall Street wunderkind, sitting on a concrete floor with her, eating takeout with plastic forks. But it felt easy. Easier than any date she'd been on in the city. "You know," she said, twirling pasta around her fork, "I always thought guys like you ate at fancy restaurants every night. White tablecloths, wine glasses, all that." Ethan wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Most nights I do. Most nights it's boring. This is better." He said it so simply, like it was obvious. Claire looked away, her cheeks heating up, and focused on her pasta. When they finished, he walked her to the elevator. The hall lights were dim, casting soft shadows on his face. "Thanks for dinner," she said, stepping inside. "Thanks for not stopping when the light was perfect," he said. "The wall is going to be amazing." The doors slid closed. Claire leaned against the wall, heart doing a silly little flip. She was in trouble. She knew she was. Chapter 5, Rooftop Sunset. By mid-November, the break room mural was halfway done. Claire had painted a bustling Brooklyn afternoon, food carts on the corner, kids chasing a dog, a street musician with a guitar, sunlight dappling through oak leaves. It was loud and warm and alive, the exact opposite of the sleek, cold office it lived in. Ethan had taken to coming back earlier and earlier. Some days he'd bring her a latte from the cafe down the street, oat milk, 1 sugar, exactly how she liked it. He never said he'd remembered, he'd just set it down beside her paint bucket and go back to his desk. "Someone's got a crush," Lena sang that week over breakfast. "He remembers your coffee order." "That's, like, relationship level 5. He's my client," Claire said, but she was smiling into her toast. "It's just, professional courtesy." "Professional courtesy my ass. The man sits and watches you paint for an hour every night. He's not watching the paint dry. He's watching you." Claire tried not to think about it. She really did. But it was hard, when he'd lean in to look at a detail on the wall, and she could smell his cologne wood smoke and cedar, warm and sharp, and feel the heat of his arm next to hers. One Friday, he found her on the rooftop at the end of the day. She was sitting on the concrete ledge, sketchbook in her lap, watching the sun dip low over the harbor. The sky was bleeding pink and orange and tangerine, painting the water in streaks of fire. "Figured I'd find you up here," he said, walking over. He'd changed out of his suit into jeans and a dark sweater, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "This is the best view in the whole city," Claire said, not looking up from her sketch. "Better than the Empire State Building. Better than the Edge. No crowds. Just, the sunset." He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sun sink lower, the sky turning from orange to lavender to deep indigo. The first stars pricked through the dark. "I haven't watched a sunset in years," Ethan said finally. His voice was quiet, almost to himself. "I'm always in meetings. Or on calls. Or staring at spreadsheets. I forget it happens." "It happens every day," Claire said softly. "You just have to look up." He turned to look at her. The fading light gilded the edge of his hair, softened the sharp line of his jaw. For a second, Claire thought he was going to say something. Something big. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened. "Work," he said, standing up. "I have to take this." "Sure." Claire smiled, trying not to feel disappointed. "Go ahead. I'll be here a little longer." He nodded and walked away, already talking into the phone, his voice sharp and businesslike again. Claire looked back out at the sunset, the last of the pink fading from the sky. She opened her sketchbook and flipped to a new page. She drew the rooftop, the sunset, and the outline of a man sitting beside her, just for a little while. Chapter 6, The Bodega Run. The next Saturday, Claire ran into him completely by accident. She was in her favorite bodega in Williamsburg, sweatpants and a hoodie, bedhead wild, grabbing a carton of orange juice and a bag of bagels. She'd just pulled an all-nighter finishing a freelance gig, and she looked like a disaster. And there he was. Ethan Hale. Leaning against the counter, holding a coffee, talking to the owner like they were old friends. Claire froze. She almost turned and hid in the snack aisle. But then he looked over and saw her, and a tiny, surprised smile tugged at his mouth. "Claire Bennett," he said, pushing off the counter. "Fancy seeing you here." "I live 3 blocks away," she said, tucking her hair behind her ears self-consciously. "I come here every Saturday." "What are you doing in Williamsburg?" "Checking on a property I own down the street." He nodded at her basket. "Bagels and orange juice." "Big Saturday plans?" "Zero plans," she laughed. "I pulled an all-nighter. I'm going home, eating an everything bagel with extra cream cheese, and watching bad movies for 12 hours. "Sounds perfect," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. The bodega owner rang them up. Ethan reached for his wallet before Claire could move, and paid for both her groceries and his coffee. "Hey," she protested. "I can pay for my own bagels." "Consider it a thank you," he said, holding the door open for her. "For the murals. They're better than I imagined." They stepped out onto the sidewalk. It was a crisp November morning, sun bright in the sky, leaves crunching under their feet. Claire had her canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder, orange juice and bagels inside. "Where are you parked?" she asked. "Actually, I was going to walk to the property. It's 10 minutes that way." He nodded down the street. "But I can walk you home first. If you want." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "You don't have to." "I want to." So they walked. They meandered down the tree-lined street, past brownstones with stoops, past little boutiques and coffee shops. Ethan pointed out a bookstore he liked, a record store he'd been going to since college. Claire told him about the best pizza place in the neighborhood, the tiny bakery that made croissants so good they'd make you cry. It was easy. So easy it scared her. No awkward silences, no small talk that felt forced. Just, walking, and talking, like they'd known each other forever. They stopped in front of her apartment building. It was a creaky old brownstone, chipped paint on the steps, a potted geranium by the door. "This is me," she said. "Nice place," he said, looking up at the building. "Very Brooklyn." "Very broke artist Brooklyn," she laughed. "But it's mine." He stood there for a second, hands in his pockets, like he didn't want to leave. "Thanks for walking me home," Claire said. "Thanks for the bagel recommendation," he said. "I'll have to try it sometime." A beat. Then. "You could try it today," she said, before she could think better of it. "If you're not busy. I'm making bagels in 10 minutes. Extra cream cheese. Bad movie optional." Ethan blinked. For a second, she thought she'd messed up, that he'd say he had work, that he was too busy, that a billionaire didn't eat bagels in a tiny Brooklyn apartment with a freelance illustrator. Then he smiled. A real smile, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Okay," he said. "Lead the way." Chapter 7, The Sketchbook. Claire's apartment was tiny. 1 bedroom, a kitchen so small you could touch both walls at once, a fire escape balcony that barely fit 2 chairs. But it was hers, filled with her art, plants in every windowsill, thrift furniture and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. Ethan stepped inside and looked around, his eyes wide. "It's a lot," Claire said, flustered, dropping her tote on the kitchen counter. I know it's small. It's alive, he said, turning to her. Your office is beautiful, but it's empty. This place feels like you. Claire's cheeks warmed. She busied herself with the toaster, pulling out cream cheese and a knife, trying to calm her racing heart. Ethan wandered over to the wall by the couch, where she'd taped up sketches and reference photos for the murals. Is this all for the project? He asked, leaning in. Most of it. Some is just stuff I draw for fun. His gaze landed on a leather-bound sketchbook on the coffee table. It was her personal one, the one she never showed anyone. Before Claire could stop him, he reached for it. Can I? No, she said, too fast, lunging across the couch. Wait, that's my private one. It's not, it's messy. But he'd already opened it. And there, on the first page he flipped to, was the drawing she'd done that night on the bridge, a man's shoulder, dark coat damp with rain, a pair of gray eyes. Claire froze. Her face went bright red. She wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. Ethan stared at the drawing for a long, silent moment. Then he looked up at her, his expression unreadable. That's me, he said. It wasn't a question. I drew it after the bridge, she mumbled, staring at her socks. I know it's weird. I'm sorry. It's not weird. He closed the sketchbook gently, like it was something precious. It's the nicest thing anyone's ever drawn for me. The toaster popped, making them both jump. Claire practically ran to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she pulled out the bagels. She could feel his eyes on her back. When she turned around, 2 plates in hand, he was standing right behind her. So close she could smell that cedar cologne again, so close she had to tilt her head up to look at him. Claire, he said, his voice low. Yeah. He lifted a hand, like he was going to touch her face. Then he hesitated, and dropped it back to his side. The bagels look great, he said instead. They ate on the couch, watching some old 90s rom-com Lena had left at the apartment. The air felt different now, thicker, charged with something unspoken. Claire could barely focus on the movie. She was too aware of him sitting beside her, his leg almost touching hers, his warmth seeping into the couch cushions. When the movie ended, Ethan stood up. I should go, he said. I have a call in an hour. Sure. Claire stood too, walking him to the door. He paused on the stoop, the November wind tangling his hair. Thank you for the bagels, he said. And for not being like everyone else. What's everyone else like? They want something from me. Money, connections, a photo for their Instagram. He looked at her, gray eyes steady. You just want to draw the sunset. Claire didn't know what to say to that. So she just smiled. See you Monday. See you Monday. He walked down the steps. Claire leaned against the door frame and watched him go, until he turned the corner and was out of sight. She closed the door and slid down to the floor, her back against the wood. Her heart was racing, her cheeks still warm. She was so screwed. Chapter 8, The First Date. Monday morning, an email was waiting in Claire's inbox. Dinner. Friday night. 7 p.m. I'll pick you up. No please, no question mark, no details about where they were going. Just a statement. Very Ethan Hale. Claire stared at it for 10 minutes. She showed it to Lena, who screamed so loud the neighbors probably heard. It's a date. Lena squealed. I told you. I told you the bagel thing was a date. It could just be a work dinner, Claire said, but she was already digging through her closet for something to wear. To discuss the murals. Work dinners don't get sent at 2 a.m. from a guy's personal email. Trust me. This is a date. Friday night, Ethan showed up at her door at 6:59 p.m., sharp as a knife in a dark suit and a white shirt, no tie. He held a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite, though she'd never told him that. "These are for you," he said, handing them over. "I asked the bodega guy what you buy." He said daisies. "You asked the bodega guy?" Claire laughed, taking the flowers. "That's very thorough." "I'm a thorough person." He took her to a tiny French restaurant in Cobble Hill, tucked away on a side street, no sign out front. The kind of place with candlelit tables and a sommelier who knew everyone's name. It was fancy, way fancier than anywhere Claire had ever been, but Ethan didn't make her feel out of place. He ordered wine for her, asked about her work, told her stories about his crazy college days at Columbia. For a guy everyone called cold and ruthless, he was surprisingly funny. Dry, deadpan humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront. The city lights sparkled across the water, the Manhattan skyline glowing like a jewel. It was cold, and Claire's hands were stuffed in her coat pockets. "Are you cold?" Ethan asked. "A little." "It's fine." Before she could protest, he slipped off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm, and it smelled like hemp, cedar and coffee and something distinctly Ethan. "Now you'll be cold," she said. "I run hot," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They stopped by the railing, looking out at the skyline. The wind blew a strand of hair into Claire's face, and Ethan reached up and tucked it behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, warm and calloused, and Claire's breath caught in her throat. He didn't pull his hand away. He cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing her skin. "Claire," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Yeah. I really want to kiss you right now." Her heart stopped. "Then do it." He leaned in. His lips were soft, softer than she'd imagined, warm against hers. The city faded away, the wind, the traffic, the lights. There was nothing but him, his hand on her cheek, his lips on hers, the taste of red wine and mint on his tongue. When they pulled apart, Claire was breathless. Her forehead rested against his, her hands fisted in the front of his shirt. "Wow," she said quietly. Ethan laughed, a low, warm sound that rumbled in his chest. "Yeah. Wow." He walked her home, and they kissed again on her stoop, slow and sweet, under the glow of the streetlight. When Claire went inside, she leaned against the door, his jacket still wrapped around her, and smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. Lena was waiting in the living room, bouncing on the couch. "Well." Claire just held up the daisies and grinned. Chapter 9, The Finished Mural. By December, the rooftop mural was the only one left. Claire was painting the Brooklyn sunset, streaks of pink and orange and gold bleeding across the sky, the water glowing like liquid fire, the bridge a dark silhouette against the light. It was her favorite of the three, the one she'd poured the most of herself into. Ethan came up to check on her every afternoon. He'd bring her hot cocoa when it was cold, sit on a folding chair and watch her paint, asking questions about color and technique. Sometimes they'd talk for hours, about nothing and everything. About her childhood in Ohio, about his father leaving when he was 12, about their dreams and fears and all the things they'd never told anyone else. Claire learned that he hated olives, loved old jazz records, and could play the piano but almost never did. She learned that he started his company with nothing but a laptop and a loan from his grandfather, that he'd slept on a couch in his first office for 6 months. She learned that under all the sharp suits and cool demeanor, he was just a guy who'd grown up too fast, who'd learned to protect himself by never letting anyone get close. And she was falling for him. Hard. The day she finished the rooftop mural, it was just after sunset. She stepped back, paintbrush in hand, and looked at her work. The sky glowed on the brick wall, warm and golden, like the sunset would never end. It's perfect. Ethan was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her. He walked over and stood beside her, so close their arms touched. "You captured it," he said, his voice soft. "The feeling of it? I don't know how you did it." "I had a good view," Claire said, turning to look at him. "And a good muse." He turned to her. His eyes were dark in the fading light, warm and soft and nothing like the cold businessman everyone else saw. "Thank you," he said. "For making this place feel like home. Like you said. That's what art does," she said. "It turns walls into something that matters." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Slow, deep, like he had all the time in the world. The last of the sunset light gilded his hair, painted gold across his shoulders. Behind them, the mural glowed, a permanent sunset on the wall. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Be my girlfriend," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a plea, quiet and raw, like he was scared she'd say no. Claire smiled, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. "I thought you'd never ask." Chapter 10, The Secret. They kept it quiet at first. No Instagram posts, no office PDAs, no telling anyone but Lena and Liam. It felt like their own little secret, something fragile and precious they didn't want to break. Ethan would pick her up after work, and they'd go to his penthouse or her tiny apartment, order takeout, watch movies, talk until 2 a.m. On weekends, they'd explore the city, go to museums, walk in Central Park, get lost in bookstores. Claire dragged him to dive bars and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. Ethan took her to the opera and fancy charity galas, but always snuck out early with her to get hot dogs from a street cart afterward. It was perfect. Too perfect, Claire sometimes thought. Like it was all a dream she'd wake up from. Liam found out first, when he walked in on them kissing in the break room by the coffee machine. He just raised an eyebrow, smiled, and said, "Took you too long enough." Lena found out when Ethan showed up at their apartment at 2 a.m. with soup for Claire, who'd come down with a bad cold. Lena leaned against the kitchen doorway, sipping tea, and watched him tuck a blanket around Claire on the couch, and didn't say a word until he left. "Okay," she said, sitting down beside Claire. "I'll admit it. He's not just a rich jerk. He's gone for you." Claire smiled into her soup. She knew. But she also knew there was a storm coming. She'd seen the way Ethan tensed up when his mother called. She'd heard the stories about Victoria Hale, about how she'd controlled every part of his life, about how she'd chased off every girl he'd ever dated. Ethan never talked about her much. He'd just say she's complicated and change the subject. But Claire could see the weight of it on him, the way he carried his family like a chain around his ankle. One night, lying in bed beside him, tracing patterns on his chest, Claire asked the question she'd been avoiding. "When do I get to meet your mom?" Ethan went still beside her. For a second, She thought he wouldn't answer. Not yet, he said finally. She's not ready. And neither are we. Ethan. Just give it time, he said, cutting her off. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Please. Claire didn't push it. But she knew. Secrets never stayed secret forever. And when Victoria Hale found out about her, all hell was going to break loose. Chapter 11, Victoria Hale. The secret lasted 3 weeks. Victoria Hale showed up at the Brooklyn office unannounced on a Tuesday morning. She was tall, elegant, silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, wearing a tailored Chanel suit and pearls. She looked like she belonged on a magazine cover, not in a half-renovated office in Brooklyn. Claire was touching up a corner of the entrance mural when she walked in. Excuse me, Victoria said, her voice cold as ice. Where is my son? Claire turned, paintbrush still in hand. She knew instantly who it was. The same gray eyes, the same sharp jawline. But where Ethan's eyes could soften, hers were like shards of glass. He's in a meeting, Claire said, wiping her hands on her jeans. He should be back in an hour. I can tell him you stopped by. And Victoria's gaze swept over her, from her paint-splattered jeans to her faded flannel, slow and judgmental. The decorator. I'm the illustrator. Claire Bennett. She held out her hand. I did the murals. Victoria didn't shake it. She just stared at her, her lips tightening into a thin line. The murals. Ethan hired an illustrator from Ohio to paint the walls of a $10 million office. Her voice dripped with disdain. How quaint. Claire's jaw tightened. She dropped her hand back to her side. He likes my work. I'm sure he likes a lot of things about you, Victoria said, her voice sharp. Listen to me, Miss Bennett. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this little fling ends now. My son has a reputation to uphold. He doesn't date girls who paint walls for a living. Claire's blood ran cold. She'd known this was coming, but nothing prepared her for how cruel it felt. With all respect, Mrs. Hale, who Ethan dates is none of your business. Everything about my son is my business. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes cold. You think you're special, you think you're the first girl who's tried to sink her claws into him. He gets bored. He always does. And when he does, you'll be gone. Back to Ohio, with a nice little check and a story to tell your friends. Is that what you tell yourself? Claire said, lifting her chin. That every woman who likes him is after his money? Victoria's face hardened. Before she could reply, the elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out, Liam right behind him. He took one look at the scene, his mother's cold anger, Claire's tight jaw, and his face went pale. Mother, he said, walking over quickly. What are you doing here? I came to see your new office. Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And to meet your new artist. Interesting choice. Ethan stepped between them, his back to Claire, shielding her. We'll talk about this later, he said to his mother, his voice low and tight. In my office. Now. Victoria shot Claire one last icy look, then turned and swept into Ethan's office. Ethan turned to Claire, his face full of guilt. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. I had no idea she was coming. It's fine, Claire said, but her voice was shaking. I get it. Family drama. It's not fine. She had no right to say that to you. He reached for her hand. I'll handle this. I promise. He kissed her quickly, then turned and followed his mother into the office. The door clicked shut behind them. Claire stood there, paintbrush in hand, her heart pounding. She'd known it wouldn't be easy. But she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. Through the office door, she could hear raised voices. Victoria's sharp tones, Ethan's deep, angry replies. She couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. The storm was here. And it was only just beginning. Chapter 12, The Fight. Ethan came out of the office an hour later. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white. She's gone, he said, walking over to Claire. I told her to stay out of my business. Ethan. Claire set down her paintbrush. What did she say? Nothing that matters. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. She's just being her. She'll calm down. Will she? Claire crossed her arms. Because she made it pretty clear she doesn't think I'm good enough for you. And honestly, I don't think she's ever going to think that. Ethan sighed. He reached for her, but Claire stepped back. Hey, he said, his voice softening. Look at me. I don't care what she thinks. Okay, this is my life. Not hers. Then why didn't you tell her about us? Claire said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Why did we have to keep it a secret? Were you scared of what she'd say? Ethan's face fell. That's not fair. Isn't it? We've been dating for a month and a half, and the only people who know are our two best friends. Your own mother had to find out by showing up unannounced. Claire's voice shook. I get that she's hard to deal with. But hiding me, it makes me feel like you're ashamed of me. That's not it, Claire. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes desperate. I'm not ashamed of you. I'm protecting you. She's vicious. She will tear you apart if she gets the chance. I didn't want you to have to deal with that yet. I don't need protecting, Claire said, her voice sharp. I'm not some fragile thing that's going to break because your mom is mean. I can handle myself. What I can't handle is being your secret. Silence fell between them. The office was cold and quiet, the murals glowing on the walls like a reminder of how things used to be, just a few hours ago. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally. I messed up. I should have told her. I wanted to keep you to myself for a little longer. Away from all the bullshit. I know. Claire's shoulders slumped. The anger drained out of her, leaving only tiredness. I get it. I do. But we can't hide forever, Ethan. If this is real, if we are real, we have to face this together. He nodded. He pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. You're right, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We'll face it together. I promise. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that it was only the beginning. That Victoria Hale wouldn't back down that easily, that there was a long, hard road ahead of them. And for the first time, she wondered if they were strong enough to make it. Chapter 13, The Gallery Show. Claire threw herself into her work after that. She finished up the last touches on the murals, took on more freelance clients, and started preparing for a small group art show at a gallery in Bushwick. It was her first real gallery show, and it meant everything to her. Ethan was supportive, of course. He asked her about it every night, helped her hang flyers around the neighborhood, told her over and over that her work was amazing. But there was a distance between them now, a thin crack that hadn't been there before. The fight with his mother had opened a door, and neither of them quite knew how to close it. Lena noticed. "You two are weird now," she said one night over wine. "All tense and quiet." "What happened?" "Nothing happened," Claire said, staring at her glass. "We just fought. About his mom." "Ah." Lena nodded. The evil mother-in-law art classic. "It's not funny, Lena." "I know. I'm sorry." Lena reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "But hey, your gallery show is next week. Focus on that. Let him deal with his mommy issues on his own time. Your art comes first. Always." Claire tried to take her advice. She spent every night in her tiny living room, painting new pieces for the show: Brooklyn sunsets, bodega cats, brownstone stoops, rain-slick streets. All the things she loved about the city, all the things that felt like home. The night of the show, the gallery was packed. Friends, other artists, random people who'd seen the flyers. Claire wandered around, talking to people, answering questions about her work, her cheeks sore from smiling. But she kept glancing at the door. Ethan had said he'd come. He'd promised. But it was 8:30, and he still wasn't there. "Maybe he got stuck at work," Lena said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of wine. "You know how he is." "Yeah," Claire said, but her chest felt tight. "I know." At 9 o'clock, she was talking to a gallery owner from Manhattan who was interested in representing her, when the door opened. Ethan walked in, suit still on, tie askew, hair messy like he'd run all the way there. His eyes found hers across the room. And he smiled. He walked over, pushing through the crowd, and stopped in front of her. "I'm so sorry I'm late," he said, breathless. "My meeting ran over, and then the subway was delayed." "You came," Claire said, cutting him off. She couldn't help the smile spreading across her face. "Of course I came." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, like he couldn't help himself, even in a room full of people. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." He looked around the gallery, at her paintings hanging on the walls, at all the people looking at her work. His eyes were bright with pride. "You're incredible," he said, so only she could hear. "Do you know that?" Claire's cheeks warmed. For a second, all the tension, all the fights, all the worry about his mother melted away. It was just them, in a room full of her art, and he was looking at her like she was the best thing he'd ever seen. "Hey," she said, nodding at the wall behind him. "That one's my favorite." He turned. It was a painting of the rooftop sunset, her favorite one, the one she'd painted the night they'd kissed for the second time. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and in the bottom corner, tiny and easy to miss, were 2 silhouettes, sitting side by side. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he turned back to her, his eyes soft. "Mine too," he said. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the gallery was closing, he pulled her into a quiet corner and kissed her. Slow and sweet, his hands on her waist, her arms around his neck. "I'm proud of you," he whispered against her lips. "So proud." And for that night, everything felt perfect again.